Welcome to Untrained.
Hey, Whitney.
Hi, Iris.
Well, it's the end of 2024 and we're recapping our season. And I am in the midst of my parents' house, helping my parents out. This is how it is.
This is the sandwich years. Here it is. It's full effect.
But also, 'tis the season. I feel like it's been a lot this December. So, but it's nice to slow down and have a chance to look at the season, what we've done, and some of the things past.
Yeah, so that's what today is, a bit of a retrospective. We're going to be looking at seasons 2 and 3 and recapping the year. And so we thought we'd start out by zooming way back to the origin story, because the origin story is present in so many of our topic choices and so many of our guests, which is that you and I loved working together, and we have a lot of safety within our relationship, and we support one another in amplifying our voice through this podcast in other places. And we want to do that for our listeners. We want to help them feel more confident, use their voice, express themselves. And that's, I think, the reason why we have more episodes under the category of voice and using your voice than any other episodes.
Absolutely. I think that we often come to the table with different guests that we want to talk to, and a lot of them do align with that. A lot of them do align with the sense of safety, belonging, voice, but also relationship to self. We've talked about that before. I think throughout we have that theme of building better relationships with yourself, building better relationships with people around you, and then also with the environment around you. That may not always keep you safe. It may not be the best environment, but how do we continue to be in a relationship in all those dynamic ways? And I think you call it inside out, outside in relationship.
Yeah. So when we think about, it's from the book, Body Image Inside Out, but the idea that inside out, so what's happening to me or what's going on inside of me that I need to take responsibility for, and then I can improve, and then I can bring more safety and love to, and that will radiate out. And then there's also what's in my external environment. What are the influences that are having an effect on me, and being curious about both and being able to work with both. So again, our guests fall into those categories as well.
Which category do you want to start with?
Well, I guess we should start with find your voice and authenticity. We had some folks that came on to very concretely give us more skills for public speaking, for making presentations. And they both made the case, which I think is so important to remember, that these are things that we weren't necessarily trained in. That's the origin of the whole podcast, right? Is that we need to thrive so many skills that we perhaps weren't given. So we want to make sure that we have those skills. So basic public speaking skills. Amanda gave us a nice overview of that. Colin Henderson also did that, and he also did that with his own personal story. Here's a guy who was stuttering and couldn't even order pizza at one point in his life, and now his professional identity and job is being on stages throughout the world delivering keynotes.
I also put Joanna Lohman there too. Mm-hmm. She uses her voice, very active, activist basically.
Yeah.
And I loved one of the things that she had said was these dials that we have is that using your voice isn't just like you're one person and one thing, and then you're just going to be a loudspeaker for all of those things. I think she really gave a dynamic view of what using your voice can mean. And it can mean multiple things. You don't have to just have one dial. You can dial things up or down as needed.
And the other thing I loved about Joanna's story, well, first of all, she claimed that she's the greatest lesbian ever to be on our podcast, which, yes. And she also talked about what shifted for her when she was allowed to be her authentic self, when she gave herself that permission slip, when her authenticity evolved, how everything shifted in her life. And then a lot of practical tools about how we can do more of that. So I think that one stood out for both of us.
I really like that one. I also feel a theme too, where people, this is their relationship to self, is at some point, people just feel like, oh, this doesn't feel right. Right.
This isn't all of it. This isn't everything.
Exactly. That authenticity piece was more along the lines, I think, of I've done all these things and I am this person, but it no longer fits where I am today. So I think that each one of these people, like Colin, Amanda Hennessy, Joanna Lohman, all of them take a minute to think about, okay, where am I? Does this fit? What needs to be rejiggered? We also had a guest who kind of talked about that too.
Well, I would say Megan Jo Wilson was outside in and inside out, right? Because she created the container through her rock star camps. She created the safety. She created the sisterhood. She created the learning, the unlearning, with the grand finale being amateur singers getting up on a stage backed up by a live all-male band and literally using their voice.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. I thought that was amazing. The rock star camps with Megan Jo Wilson. Mm-hmm. So what other topics, I don't want to move on too quickly from this topic. This was a big one, using your voice. Was there anything else that you feel like resonated before I move on to a different category?
Well, I'm just going to pause and maybe take a moment for each of us. I mean, we're going on 2 years with the podcast. It's definitely a journey of using our voices and a place to express and to share. So what are your reflections in your journey around your voice?
Do we have like an hour? Right. We can just talk about how I think more, I'm going to be 44 in January. I think it's more of validating my own voice, that I am permissioning myself to be heard in spaces where I would usually just not say anything, or I would kind of step back. And I think it's more, how do I articulate myself in a way that speaks to what it is that I need? Because often raising my voice is trying to articulate the support I need. So I think that's been a lifelong thing of just tapping into what is it that I want? What is it that I need? How do I advocate for myself? How do I speak up in those moments? So I think those are all the speaking up pieces. But, just on a tactical level, the speaking up about Amanda Hennessy's work on the tactical speaking or public speaking, I think is really important too. The thing that I took away from her that I use often, and this is also for just what I'm advocating for myself too, is when you're talking to an audience, you're providing them some information, you're connecting with them. It's not you just talking to an audience and then hoping you're perfect at it. I think it's more of this connectivity piece. And that's the same way I approach like the support for myself. It isn't just about myself. It's like, if I can advocate for what I need, I can be in better connection and better alignment with the people around us. So back to your point, that's our relationship, right? Is we're aligned, we can speak to each other, we can communicate, and it's about connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. Well, I think of this book I read about the happiest countries, and one of the happiest countries was Iceland. And the reason cited was that they are very creative people, and they just engage in creativity and they don't take it too seriously. And it's just something that everybody does. And I was thinking about how popular podcasts have become and how cool that is, that so many people have been handed a permission slip to share what's important to them and to create something. And I think that I know how much I've benefited from the opportunity to do this. And yes, it's work. And yes, I have a lot of vulnerability hangovers. And yes, sometimes it's hard to share it on LinkedIn and really promote it. And, there was a time when all of that would have sent me into a complete terror. And now I can really see the fruits of the sharing and the creating for my own life and my own voice and my own confidence. So I'm just going to do a shout out to the experience. Going back to sort of Meg and Joe Wilson, like if there's something that you feel inspired to do, giving yourself support and making it happen, and run an experiment and see if it's worth it, right? Like at the end of every year, we have to say, is it worth the time, the money, the energy to keep doing this? And we keep ending up with a hell yeah, it is, right? We're not earning an income from it. Its value is in our sharing in the community and in flexing our own voice muscles.
Yeah, and the creative process that we do together in connection, right? So Scott, our producer, can use this as an ad for getting more podcasts because it is very much a creative outlet for the both of us and a place for us to be heard, be seen, and to be able to raise these topics that we think are really important.
So we can't talk about using our voice without talking about anxiety, imposter syndrome, not feeling like enough, because that's just something that most people deal with to some degree. And we had Dr. Ellen Vora on, and she did such a beautiful job of talking about how in her practice, she helps people manage anxiety simply with how we manage our bodies, how we feed our bodies, how we move our bodies, what we expect from our bodies, and that we can make significant changes to how we feel in our bodies through some of the strategies she has outlined in the podcast and in her book.
That's so well summarized as usual. Dr. Ellen Vora for me was a huge get for this podcast because I walked into Barnes and Nobles. I got this book. I took a picture of the book. I sent it to you and I was like, I got to have this woman on. And thankfully she's, using LinkedIn. I could see she was connected to someone else actually in the field of fencing, which was very interesting. And, for me, reading that book was so important because as you and I talk about too, is that we don't just experience the world cognitively, but we also experience it in our own bodies. And how do we utilize that? As ex-athletes, we utilize our bodies all the time to give us messages sometimes we ignore those messages.
Yeah, a lot of time.
But I think it's really that book for me and Dr. Ellen Vora just helped validate how we kind of look at the world. It's in a very holistic experience, not just a cognitive experience, but a whole body, a whole functioning, a whole person, a whole being experience.
Yes. And I felt so aligned with her work. She's actually the quote on the top of the book, Body Image Inside Out, that came out for me and Deb Schachter this year. So I'm grateful to have met Dr. Vora. Also along those lines, Dr. Tanya Pruitt-White talking about not enoughness and how she works with that feeling and how she helps her clients with that sense to move out of not enoughness into our enoughness. And can I just make a little bit of a connection between that not enoughness and and Clara Bingham, the award-winning journalist, who was our last episode talking about her book, The Movement and the Feminist Movement. And if we see where we've been as females or people identify as female and how far we've come and how much terrain there is still to cover, I think it helps understand the not enoughness, some of the origins of it.
Oh, 100%. Right. I think that we often forget the lived history, right? And we are not just dropped into this time period with nothing before and after. We're not an absolute value of our time period. We are affected by those before and those that will come, right? But, I often think about that is we have these feelings and sometimes that not enoughness can come from that place. It can come from years of being told as a female of my mother and my grandmother being told that they're not enough for something, not given opportunities, and you hold that. So I do think that generational piece is really important. And I think we acknowledged it by bringing Clara Bingham on. And, I think for me, Dr. Tanya Pruitt-White, knowing her as Tanya, I think it's really important that someone like her came on because we could be really good in our fields. We could be at the top of our game, and we could still feel like we're not enough. Right. And we can still struggle with those, or we can still be triggered to have responses. And, it wasn't this year's episode, but last year, I've worked with Dr. Lisa and Richard Orbe Austin, which we'll talk about later, but, they, doing their imposter syndrome work, they recognize the fact that it's not just a one and done experience, that you're always, whenever you get to another level or a threshold experience, you're going to have some bits of that. You're going to get better at responding. But I think Tanya was a great example of, you could be really good at what you do and still feel that way. And that's okay.
Yeah. And let's pivot to Dr. Richard Orbe Austin. Dr. Lisa Orbe Austin had one of she is the most, at least on YouTube, the most viewed episode we've ever created by far. Why don't we pivot to the episode with Dr. Richard Orbe Austin? I know that one was profound and powerful for me. He talked about not only imposter syndrome, but how it intersects with diversity, equity, and inclusion in our work cultures.
Again, it's the safety piece, right? And we can be in places, we did talk to him about covering, we've talked to him about different topics that have come up. I think he is an advocate for these cultures to really look at themselves, these environments. Are you providing enough safety, belonging for these environments? And you're doing it in a way that's helping everyone, not just one type of person feel safe in that environment. So when we talked about in the beginning, we said like a relationship to self, relationship to others, and this relationship to the larger environment that you live in. So he really talked about that piece. And Sarah Cusick actually is so interesting. I've had so many people talk to me about how much they really liked her episode and how she talked about it. And the one thing I took away from it was this: you're always untraining these biases and always double checking. And you can do that in ways that aren't these like big ways, but you can read books from different genres. You can read an article from a different place. There's always this sort of like getting information from other sources.
You can follow people on your Instagram feed you wouldn't normally follow, or sort of out of your, there's lots of different ways I think we can use social media to expose our brain to different types of people. Yeah,
I think she was really powerful. It's a good message for all of us, right? Mm-hmm. We now in this social media era, we can get locked into some sort of algorithm. And I think it's up to us as intelligent people to get out of our own ways there. So yeah, that was a great episode with Sarah. It was something it's a very popular one for many of our listeners.
And because of what we saw our clients going through, we had 2 episodes on career transitions. We had Brenda Mariah, who talked to us about when you're at that place of not having a job and looking for a job, what are some strategies? What are some permission slips? How can you manage yourself inside and outside to navigate that successfully? And Jim Hall, he talked about midlife career transitions and gave a lot of concrete strategies and tactics. And that was an enjoyable conversation as well.
Yeah, Jim is here in Rochester Institute of Technology, and actually it sort of took off a little bit. He's a lot of fans because I think there's not a lot of people out there talking about this midlife. Hey, this doesn't fit me. I want to do something else. And we're living longer. Our careers are longer. People are working longer. So I think there's a need to adapt and to shift the marketplace a little bit for this group of people who are extremely knowledgeable, that might not want to go down the same path, but have a lot of transferable skills. So Jim is very popular because I think not a lot of people are talking about this subject of changing careers midlife. And Brenda gives such great advice that we've had a couple of people actually go to her from listening to our episode to ask for career help. So again, if you are looking to switch jobs or in the midst of a job search, she's a great person to listen to in that podcast. So we're just teeing up different subjects. So
yeah, yeah, I was going to say the last topic we had or category was mindset, and one could argue many of these are mindset categories. But we had 2 folks that we know pretty well on that topic. So Akil Abdullah is somebody that I rode with back in the day, and I always admired his journey and also just his open heart. And so it was a joy to have him come on and not, he's used to having people ask him to be on podcasts and say, like, tell us how you were so successful. And we were like, yeah, no, we want to know what you had to untrain to be happy, to be successful in a new area other than just being an Olympic athlete. So that was a lot of fun for me personally to have that conversation.
Yeah, what's interesting is I think a lot of people want to come to us as Olympians and people who have been at the top of our game to come to us about mindset. But, it's interesting because we approach it so differently.
Like heart set too.
Yeah, exactly. And you and I know how much work we've had to do. We were really successful at something, but at a certain cost. And then redefining what success looks like, I think, is also a huge part of our topics, is that it's an underlying piece, is success is great, but at what cost? And can we redefine success that it more aligns with who you are and where you are at the moment? So again, it's that like, it doesn't fit you because we can do a whole lot of things to get to where we are, but in order for us to continue to evolve, we may have to untrain or retrain.
Right. And maybe sort of like Joanna's story, you can be successful, but not at all be who you actually are. And that's what feels good, is to be yourself.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting. I think people will come to us always about mindset. How do we become more successful? But it's so much more than that. And I hope our listeners get this from us, this holistic approach, a more deeper dive into things, not just here 5 tools to be really successful, but we talked about untraining. We have an episode about that too, of like what it means. I think we've recorded that this year too, but we're trying to get to a place. And again, I think of it as better relationship. What do you think of it as?
I absolutely think it's a better relationship with yourself. And I was just thinking, I can give my clients, here are 5 tools all day long. And sometimes here's a tool, great, they're going to run with it. But often it's, here's why I'm resistant to that tool. Here's why it didn't work last time. Here's why I'm afraid to use my voice. And to really explore that and do the healing and the untraining to prepare someone to take the tool and run with it. And that involves more than just our mind and more than just a mindset. It involves our whole body.
Right. And we have, embodiment episodes. You have a book out. Right. So about that. So I'm hoping that our listeners see that whole approach. Is it time to talk about our 2025 yet? Because I'm really excited about 2025.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little bolder in reaching out to people that we would like to have conversations with and asking them to be on the podcast. So we've got a couple folks we're really excited. We want to prime for you. So I'm going to talk about Dr. Lisa Orbe-Austin and Dr. Richard Orbe-Austin, because they've got a book out for kids. So not just they know how to treat imposter syndrome, but they're also really good at how to prevent it. So how exciting is that going to be to have that conversation with them?
Yeah, I think there's a really exciting book out by Jonathan Haidt on the anxious generation. Thank you. And this is kind of their answer to that, I think, in some ways, not to him specifically, but the anxiety that kids are feeling and how do we help them be in better relationship to themselves. I think that's great. And as parents, how do we support that? I also wanted to note that we're at a different level of our podcast, that people are actually coming to us to want to be on these podcasts. Yes. And so we want to make sure that these people that are coming to you are aligned with our messaging and also with our audience too. So again, if you want to hear from someone or you think someone should be great on our and aligned with us, reach out to us, like us on Apple Podcasts. But so 2025, I will say I'm really excited about Kathy Delaney Smith. She is coming to us. She is, oh my God, the tagline. She is the
winningest coach of any sport, men's or women's, in the history of the Ivy League.
Talk about that. How did a woman coach get there, and how did she do that? And
At Harvard.
At Harvard. She's a pretty amazing person, so I'm very excited about that episode. And then we have another person coming up.
Yeah, so one night of my late night Instagram scrolling, I stumbled upon Isra Nasir, who wrote a book, Toxic Productivity: Reclaim Your Time and Energy in a World That Always Demands More. And I thought, good Lord, what could be more aligned with the Untrained podcast? So we're very grateful that she's going to be joining us in February, and you'll hear from her in March.
One last person who we definitely have on the docket too is Travis Thomas. He's someone I worked with at Limitless Minds. He has a new book out on courage and confidence, and he talks a lot to different teams and leaders. And he used to do improv. He's very fun to talk to.
It's going to be fun.
It's going to be so
We
fun.
might be dancing by the end. I'm looking forward to that. And
Maybe.
and our personal success, we have the Untrained podcast now has its very own LinkedIn page, and within a week it will have its very own website. So she's growing, our little podcast.
Awesome job, Whitney. Whitney's the website guru. I am not. So she's the genius behind that. But we are, I think, forever grateful that people are listening to our podcast and liking our podcast and commenting on our podcast and even wanting to be on our podcast, because for us, it is very dear to us as something for our relationship. We create something together for others. It is a place where we can have our voice be heard. So I am grateful for this. All right, Whitney, at the end of every podcast, what do we say?
We say, keep untraining.
Keep untraining. Happy New Year. Happy holidays. Thank you so much for listening to our creative outlet, our podcast. Make sure that you like us on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. So make a comment, give us some stars, give us a high five. We'd love to hear from you.
We'll see you in 2025.